My parents forgot my birthday 3 times because their golden child threw another tantrum. After 15 years of neglect, our family looked normal from the outside, but inside, it felt like we were living in 2 different worlds. I was the older brother by just a year, but it often felt like I was from a different planet compared to my sister, Emily. Born with chronic health problems and a physical disability, her life revolved around doctor's visits, special accommodations, and a lot of pain. Mum and Dad did everything they could to make her life easier and happier, which I understand, but it meant they didn't really show up for me in the same way. From as early as I can remember, I was the healthy one, the easy kid, which meant I often had to fend for myself. My parents were always busy making special arrangements for Emily, which took a lot of time and energy, leaving little room for anything else, including me. When we were little, I would get excited about family outings, hoping that maybe this time we'd all go together. But more often than not, I ended up staying with a neighbor or being dropped off at Aunt Linda's. It was always, "We'll bring you next time," or "It's just easier if Emily doesn't have to travel too far today." Those next times never seemed to come. It wasn't just the outings, it was the everyday moments too, playing at the park, going for ice cream, or just watching a movie together. They always chose activities that fit Emily's needs. I understood she needed more care, but it often felt like they forgot they had another child who wanted to feel part of the family. The first time I really felt the sting of being the forgotten one was on my 8th or 9th birthday. There was no party, no special dinner. I woke up that day hoping for a surprise, but the whole day went by without a word. They had taken Emily to a concert she had been looking forward to, something they had planned for months. It just so happened that my birthday fell on the same day as a concert Emily wanted to attend. They came back buzzing about how much fun they had, while I sat there feeling invisible. The next day, my mum realized they'd forgotten my birthday and handed me a last-minute $5 gift card as a kind of apology. It was a nice gesture, but it felt so insignificant compared to the effort they'd put into making sure Emily could see her favorite band live. As we grew older, this pattern continued. Everything seemed to revolve around Emily's needs, and I was expected to just understand. I often found myself spending time alone or at friends' houses, anywhere I felt a little more seen. I remember when I turned 10, a big deal for any kid. I had dropped hints about wanting to do something fun as a family, like hitting the arcade or having a pizza party. But as my birthday approached, it became clear that nothing was planned. No whispers of secret surprises, no hidden gifts. On the morning of my birthday, it felt like everyone had forgotten. There was no happy birthday at breakfast, just the usual cereal and talk about what Emily needed. She'd been having a rough week health-wise, so I understood the focus on her, but it still stung. I went to school that day, hoping my parents would remember and maybe surprise me when I got home. But when I walked through the door that afternoon, I knew there'd be no surprise, no cake waiting on the counter. My mum was busy on the phone arranging therapy for Emily, and my dad was at work, as usual. It felt like just another day. Even though it was supposed to be mine, I didn't say anything. What would be the point? It wouldn't make them remember or care. Instead, I went to my room and tried to make the best of it. My friends at school had remembered and even pooled some change to buy me an ice cream at lunch, which was a small bright spot in an otherwise lonely day. It helped a little, making the day feel a bit less ordinary. The next day, my mum must have seen the date on something and suddenly realized they'd missed my birthday. She apologized, saying things had been hectic with Emily. I nodded and said it was okay, but it really wasn't. They promised we'd do something that week to make up for it, but come the weekend, plans fell through again. Emily wasn't feeling up for going out, and instead of doing something at home, we ended up just watching her favorite movies. My dad picked up a cake, one of those pre-made ones from the grocery store, but it felt like an afterthought, a consolation prize rather than a celebration. This pattern wasn't new, it was just more of the same. Another year, another forgotten celebration. It wasn't just about the party or the gifts, it was about feeling recognized, feeling like I mattered too. Each missed birthday served as a reminder that my needs and desires were always secondary. By the time my 12th birthday rolled around, I had lowered my expectations. I didn't bother hinting or asking for anything. It was easier not to hope for something that wasn't going to happen. That year, I spent my birthday like any other day, doing homework, playing video games, and helping around the house. At least my parents remembered to say happy birthday this time, along with a quick hug before returning to their usual routine. Emily had a doctor's appointment that day, so most of the attention was on getting her ready and out the door. That birthday hurt the most, not because anything dramatic happened, but because it was so painfully ordinary. There was no neglect out of malice, just a habit of focusing on Emily's needs, leaving mine unacknowledged. It wasn't just birthdays either. School achievements and hobbies were similarly brushed aside. As I got older, the disappointment hardened into something else. Resignation. I stopped expecting things to be different. The parties I attended were a glimpse into a different kind of childhood, one where parents actively celebrated their kids. I cherished those moments, soaking in the warmth of the festivities before returning to my own reality. When I began therapy a few years later, one therapist pointed out that these missed moments were significant. They revealed patterns that highlighted my parents' priorities. In our sessions, I struggled to convey how these patterns left me feeling unimportant and secondary. My parents listened, but there was always an excuse, a reason things had to stay the same. They promised to be more aware, yet the habits of a lifetime are hard to change. Looking back now, I see how those early experiences shaped my expectations of life and relationships. They taught me to not ask for too much, to not expect too much, so I wouldn't be disappointed. Yet they also inspired me to become the kind of parent I aspire to be, one who celebrates each child for who they are, not just for what they need. In my childhood, my grandparents were the unsung heroes. While my parents were often consumed by managing Emily's health issues, Grandma and Grandpa stepped in to fill the void. They didn't perform grand gestures, but in my eyes, they were a beacon of normalcy and warmth, a stark contrast to the chill at home. Grandma had a magical way of making every little moment special. She had an old, faded recipe book, and during my visits, she'd let me choose a recipe for us to try together. Whether it was her famous chocolate chip cookies or something as simple as spaghetti, those moments became our cherished ritual. During our cooking sessions, she shared stories from her own childhood, tales of mischief with her siblings. I lived for those stories. They connected me to a world where I felt seen, where I wasn't just the other child. Grandpa, on the other hand, was the quiet strength of the duo. A man of few words, he had a presence that made me feel secure. His passion for model trains filled the basement of their house, creating a space that was both magical and comforting. He dedicated countless hours to his elaborate train setups, always inviting me to join him. It wasn't just about the trains, it was about sharing something he loved. In that space, I found refuge from my family's worries. Those days made me feel like a kid again, not just an observer in my sister's life. They celebrated every report card and every small achievement my parents often overlooked. When I scored my first soccer goal, Grandma baked a cake, and Grandpa displayed the ball in the living room, making it feel monumental. It meant everything to me. But life has a way of reminding you that nothing stays the same. 3 years ago, Grandma got sick, a slow decline that mirrored the fading of my childhood innocence. Her vibrant energy dimmed, and the kitchen, once the heart of our interactions, grew silent. I watched helplessly as the disease took hold, transforming our cooking sessions into brief, strained visits where she mostly slept while I held her hand, missing her even when she was right there. When she passed away, it felt like losing a part of my foundation. The funeral was a blur, filled with people offering condolences, saying how wonderful she had been and how deeply she would be missed. I nodded and thanked them, but inside, I felt a hollowing out, like someone had scooped out the center of me. After Grandma's death, Grandpa changed. The spark in his eyes, once bright when he shared a new train setup or told a joke, faded. Our gatherings in the basement became less frequent, then stopped altogether. He moved through his days mechanically, caught in a routine without joy. The model trains gathered dust, and our conversations grew stilted, both of us lost in our grief. Eventually, the decision was made to move him to a nursing home in another city. The house, too big and filled with memories, became too much for him alone. I understood the reasons, but it felt like another anchor being lifted, leaving me adrift. Our visits turned into monthly trips that I focused more on making sure he was okay than on sharing anything meaningful. I'd sit in the sterile visitor room, making small talk, both of us avoiding the deep emptiness Grandma left behind. With Grandma gone and Grandpa far away, my buffer against the loneliness at home was gone. The shift back to a life dominated by my sister's needs felt tougher than ever. The contrast was stark. While my grandparents had made me feel seen, at home I felt more invisible than before. The routines continued, with Emily's needs shaping our family life, and I faded further into the background. The isolation was both physical and emotional. During family gatherings, conversations circled around Emily's latest treatments or challenges. I'd try to share snippets about school or friends, but it often felt like I was speaking into a void. My words seemed to disappear the moment they left my lips, unimportant and fleeting. Even at school, I started to withdraw. Friends invited me to hang out, but I found myself declining more often, choosing solitude over the effort of pretending everything was okay. They knew about Emily, of course, but no one really understood the weight of living in her shadow, of having my own needs and desires continually sidelined. The hardest part was feeling guilty for these emotions. Emily didn't choose her health issues, and I knew my parents were doing their best under difficult circumstances. But knowing that didn't ease the sting of neglect or fill the growing void within me where familial warmth once resided. As I navigated this new reality, I realized I needed to seek new sources of support and ways to feel valued. I turned to teachers, coaches, and any adult who might offer a word of encouragement or a moment of recognition. Each small acknowledgement felt like a lifeline, a reminder that I could be more than just the healthy sibling. Losing my grandparents marked not just the end of their physical presence in my life, but also a significant shift in my childhood. It forced me to confront the imbalance in my family and begin finding ways to carve out my own space. Finding my own space and identity, separate from the family drama that had defined me for so long, was a challenge. Sibling rivalry is common, but when your sibling has special needs, the dynamics change drastically. Rivalry doesn't quite capture it. We were never really competing on the same level. Emily's needs always took precedence, and while I understood that intellectually, emotionally, it was another story. One evening, things came to a head. I was in the middle of a rare gaming session, my only escape in a home filled with therapists and medical crises. Emily was having a rough day, in more pain than usual, which made her irritable and moody. My parents were doing their best to soothe her, but nothing seemed to help. Then, in a moment of frustration, Emily lashed out. It wasn't the first time she'd had a tantrum, but this time my gaming console became the target. Controllers flew, the console crashed to the floor, and the game I was immersed in dissolved into a screen of static. I sat there, stunned, staring at the wreckage of my escape. When I looked to my parents for support, hoping they'd acknowledge the impact of her actions on me, all I received was a hurried apology as they scooped her up, focused on calming her down. Their concern was entirely for her tears and reasons, while my feelings and property were brushed aside. The message was clear. Her immediate needs were prioritized over mine. That night, after Emily calmed down and everyone else moved on, I was left with a broken console and growing resentment. As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the unfairness of it all. Her needs seemed to eclipse everything else. It wasn't her fault she was in pain, but why did I have to be the collateral damage? In the days that followed, I struggled to process these feelings. I brushed off the incident, but my frustration simmered beneath the surface. I found myself snapping over small things and withdrawing even further. My parents noticed, but misinterpreted my mood as typical teenage angst, attributing it to school stress or a passing phase. They suggested I might need more sleep, or should consider talking to a school counselor, which felt like another dismissal, another way of saying my problems weren't significant. It was around this time that I first mentioned the idea of family therapy. Unsure of what to expect, I was desperate for anything that could help us communicate better. To my surprise, my parents agreed. Perhaps they sensed things were spiraling, or maybe they hoped a professional could help mend the growing rifts in our family dynamics. Soon, we found ourselves sitting in a stark, quiet room across from a therapist who genuinely wanted to hear from each of us. Therapy sessions quickly became part of our weekly routine. While they were meant to foster communication and understanding, it often felt like we were just going through the motions. My parents, eager to make up for past neglect, initially threw themselves into the process with desperate energy. For a brief moment, it seemed like we were making real progress. The therapist encouraged us to share our feelings openly, which was a new and uncomfortable experience. I talked about feeling like an outsider in my own family and the pain of having my needs consistently overlooked. It felt liberating to voice these feelings, to have them acknowledged by someone who didn't dismiss them as typical teenage drama. For the first time in a long while, my parents listened, really listened. They seemed shocked to realize how deeply their actions had affected me. There were tears, apologies, and promises to do better. In that moment, I allowed myself to believe that change was possible, that we could find a new normal where I wasn't just an afterthought. To put those good intentions into practice, we decided to implement more structured family time. Once a week, we would do something together that didn't revolve around my sister's medical needs or preferences. It felt like a small but significant step forward. It was a concession that meant the world to me. The first few outings were a bit awkward, yet they felt special. We went to movies, explored museums, and even spent an afternoon bowling. These activities had no ties to hospitals or therapy, allowing us a brief escape. But Emily, who was used to being the center of our parents' attention, quickly noticed the shift. Jealousy bubbled beneath the surface, manifesting in small, pointed comments about how much fun we must be having without her, or how nice it must be for her to enjoy some quiet time at home. Her tone was light, but the message was clear. She felt left out and unhappy. Things escalated during what was supposed to be a peaceful family dinner. Emily broke down, accusing our parents of neglecting her in favor of spending time with me. Her reaction was intense, a mix of genuine fear and a manipulation tactic she had learned well. Caught off guard, my parents stumbled over their words, apologizing and trying to reassure her, but the guilt was palpable. As a result, our planned outings dwindled. When we did go out, they were overshadowed by Emily's dissatisfaction. My parents found themselves torn between their commitment to me and their instinct to prioritize Emily's emotional needs. It was a difficult balancing act, and slowly things began to revert to how they had always been. Feeling guilty about the turmoil, I suggested we return to the status quo. Maybe it was easier to let everything center around Emily. But the therapist, to their credit, pushed back, reminding us that this was precisely why we were in therapy. To break unhealthy patterns, not reinforce them. So we continued our sessions, each one charged with tension. Emily's feelings of jealousy and abandonment became the central theme, and much of our time was spent addressing her fears and insecurities. It felt like we were moving backward, still focusing on her, even in moments meant to be shared. In what was supposed to be a constructive family therapy session, Emily made a shocking accusation. She claimed our parents favored me because I was the normal one. Her words hit hard, spiraling our parents into a whirlwind of self-doubt. In their attempts to reassure her, they often compromised their own emotional well-being and undermined the progress we'd made as a family. It was a painful cycle, difficult to witness, and even harder to endure. I began to feel like the villain in my own family narrative, simply for wanting a bit of the love and attention that seemed to flow so freely to Emily. Gradually, I withdrew from the therapy sessions and my efforts to engage with the family. What was the point if it only led to more hurt? The tipping point arrived when my parents, hoping to manage Emily's growing distress, suggested we see a different therapist, someone who might provide a fresh perspective. To me, It felt like a way to placate Emily and find someone who would validate their focus on her. I felt defeated. All the discussions and promises of change seemed hollow, easily swept away at the first sign of trouble. I was exhausted, emotionally and mentally drained from the relentless tug-of-war for my parents' attention. It seemed that no matter what we talked about, Emily's needs always took precedence, while my feelings were merely footnotes, acknowledged but never truly addressed. The breaking point came during a particularly tense therapy session. We sat in uncomfortable silence, the air heavy with unexpressed frustrations. The therapist was trying to guide us, but it felt like we were going in circles. My parents and I were trying to shift toward a more balanced family dynamic, but it felt futile. They were clearly stressed, caught between my needs and Emily's. She was visibly upset, feeling like she was losing the focus she had always known. I had prepared to speak openly that day, hoping to convey the depth of my isolation within our family. Taking a deep breath, I started to share my feelings. I didn't hold back with general statements, I went deep. I expressed how hurt I was that my achievements seemed overlooked, how my birthdays felt like mere dates on a calendar, and how I often felt more like a roommate than a son. As I spoke, the room fell into a heavy silence, thick with tension. My parents looked shocked, perhaps unaware of how their actions had affected me. Emily, however, fidgeted uncomfortably in her chair. When it was their turn to respond, my parents' reaction was disappointing. They started with apologies, as they had before, but quickly shifted to justifying their actions. They spoke about the complexities of Emily's health needs, framing them as necessities rather than preferences, insisting they were doing their best under challenging circumstances. Emily chimed in, her voice trembling with emotion. She accused me of trying to guilt her for things beyond her control and of being selfish for wanting what she considered equal attention. Her words stung. It wasn't about competition, but about wanting to feel like a valued part of the family. The therapist attempted to redirect the conversation, but the damage had been done. The air was thick with hurt feelings and accusations, leaving me feeling a mix of anger and despair. It became clear that no amount of talking would change the fundamental dynamics in our family. My parents were too entrenched in their roles as caregivers for Emily to see beyond her immediate needs, and Emily wasn't ready to acknowledge anything beyond her own reality. The session ended with an uneasy agreement, leaving us all feeling more distant than before. As we left, I could sense a change within me. The faint hope I had held onto that therapy might help us understand each other had vanished. I was done trying to fight for attention and explain my feelings to those who couldn't see their significance. Over the following weeks, I withdrew, spending more time alone and focusing on my studies and personal interests outside of home. My parents noticed, but seemed unsure how to bridge the growing gap between us. Their tentative attempts to connect, asking about my day or weekend plans, felt hollow, like too little too late. Emily also noticed my distance, but her reaction was mixed. Part of her seemed relieved to reclaim the spotlight, yet there was a flicker of curiosity about my newfound independence. She asked a few times about my activities, but we were both too scarred from past conflicts to truly open up again. As the weeks turned into months, my future began to take shape with more clarity. I realized I needed to carve out my own path, one that didn't rely on my family, recognizing my needs. I dove into researching colleges, scholarships, and programs that sparked my interest, channeling my energy into building a life where I didn't feel like a background character. My relationship with my parents remained strained. We shared meals and conversations under the same roof, but there was an unspoken understanding that things had changed. They continued to focus on Emily, now more cautious around me, perhaps fearful of igniting another confrontation. The suggestion to switch therapists came up again, this time with a sense of urgency. My parents hoped a new perspective could heal the fractures within our family. For me, it felt like agreeing to start a book I already knew the ending to. Pointless and exhausting. I declined, telling them it was too late for new beginnings in therapy. That ship had sailed, and I was already looking toward new horizons. They were disappointed, But there was also a sense of resignation in their acceptance, a recognition that they had missed too many chances to truly connect, make things right. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolved to move forward and create a life where I was more than just an afterthought. It wasn't the family dynamic I had hoped for, but it was one I could accept, knowing I had tried and finally chosen to prioritize my own well-being. After moving out and reducing contact with my family, life started to feel more like mine. I wasn't just the older brother sidelined by my sister Emily's needs. I was free to be myself, living my own life and making my own rules in a new city. The decision to go low contact wasn't easy. After all, family is family. But the constant neglect had taken its toll, and I needed space to discover who I was outside of that dynamic. At first, the silence was strange. There were no echoes of Emily's demands or the chaos that usually surrounded them, just me and my thoughts, which was both scary and liberating. I found a small apartment, got a job I didn't mind, and slowly began to piece together a routine that was mine alone. When my first birthday after the move arrived, I didn't expect much, maybe a call if I was lucky. But the day came and went in silence. No calls, no texts, nothing. It hit harder than I anticipated. I didn't want much, just a sign that I existed outside of Emily's world. I ended up spending the day alone, reflecting on everything that had led me to this point. It was a sobering reminder of why I had put distance between us. Instead of making a fuss, I let it slide and used the experience as motivation to invest more in my new life. I began making friends, real friends, people who showed up for me, remembered small details, and made plans. We'd hang out after work, grab drinks, or just chill at someone's place playing games or watching movies. Little by little, I started to feel part of something again, a community where I wasn't just the other kid. The next year, I approached my birthday with a fresh mindset. I didn't check my phone for missed calls or messages from home. Instead, I planned a big night out with my friends. We hit a couple of bars and celebrated the way I wanted to, surrounded by people who truly cared. I laughed more in the bars that night than I had in years, celebrating my birthday until the early hours. It was hands down the best birthday I'd ever had. This time, I was the main event, not an afterthought, and it felt amazing. Days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I called home. Sure enough, they'd forgotten again, and this time, there wasn't even an apology, just a shift to how things were going with Emily. It stung a little, but it reinforced my resolve to keep my distance. My life was here now, filled with people who truly valued me. By the third year in my new city, my birthday had transformed into something I genuinely looked forward to. I threw another big party, this time even bigger. We rented out a space, hired a DJ, and it was a blast. Friends, both old and new, came to celebrate. Surrounded by people who cared about me, I fully grasped what I had missed for so long. Once again, I made that familiar call to my family. As expected, they had forgotten my birthday again, but I didn't even mention it this time. Our conversation was brief, touching on mundane topics, starkly contrasting the warmth and joy of my celebrations. That call underscored a truth. While they were my family by blood, my real family was made up of the friends who stood by me. With them, I was never an add-on. I was integral. They didn't just remember my birthday, they made it special. They didn't just ask about my day, they were part of it. Together, we supported each other through job changes, breakups, successes, and failures, building a network of mutual care and respect that I had always longed for but never truly experienced with my own family.